Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, for an odd little bonus episode using up the spare minutes in my podcasting plan for this month. I've just got home from a trip to Adelaide. It's a city in the far south of Australia. I took my children on a plane for the first time, and as I was looking out the window, I thought of you, dear listener, because I saw an endless sheet of cloud, and I thought, there's that Lord Dunsany story that I can't think of anything decent to do with, called The Unpasturable Fields, and then I had some good ideas. First, I remembered seeing a photograph of a von Karman vortex street caused by a lighthouse. Let me try and explain what that is. A von Karman vortex street, and I'm mispronouncing the name Karman, check the spelling in the podcast notes, is a regular pattern of vortices that appear in the tail of a solid object that is obstructing a current. Now, in the photograph I was looking at, there were clouds being blown by a wind in a straight line onto a lighthouse. And so, in the lee of that lighthouse, there were a series of vortices of gradually decreasing size. Now, here's why that matters. We talk about the Vim field that surrounds the earth that magicians use to power their spells as if it was a fluid, a tide. It washes, it circles the axis magica. And we talk about the Parma magica as an obstruction. It's essentially a dome or pillar, so the Viz field takes the place of the wind and the clouds, and the Covenant takes the place of the lighthouse. This means that behind a newly established Covenant, you might have a von Karman vortex street. That is an area of turbulent magical energy, flickering aura. This probably displeases nearby fairies, because it makes it harder for them to maintain their glamour. It also probably has strange effects on humans, because when magical auras rise, their senses are sharper, there are more colours, tastes are sharper. So they might, and remember, it forms a regular pattern, they might regularly have periods where they have supernatural powers, or just enhanced senses. Similarly, if your Covenant was in the vortex street of another object, it might explain why your Covenant's aura had the flickering hook. So this is what I was thinking as I was looking out across the clouds. Of course, I didn't see a von Karman vortex street while I was looking out the window. That would have been incredibly dangerous. But it may have something to do with the early fairy rivals that spring Covenants seem to always throw up. Maybe it's that when you plant a Covenant in a place, you're putting a big pillar in the river. Other things that I thought of. The Lord Dunsany story essentially has a set of mountains arguing with a set of clouds, so earth elementals and air elementals not liking each other. And the clouds talk about how they have the unpasturable fields of the Pegasi, which is fun if you want to farm Pegasi, or you want to take part in the war between the clouds and the mountains. But I'd never been able to really find a better story, and then I thought of something. In one of the earlier 3rd edition books, I think it's Hooks, I'm not sure, there's the Sailor from the Sea Above, which is a magical spirit that looks like a human being, who is sailing in a skyship, and his anchor gets stuck on the earth, so he dives down to loose his anchor, and if he stays on the surface, he drowns, essentially. Your characters can take to the skies and use the sky areas as a way of getting from one place to another without encountering wandering monsters. So, at the time I didn't like it very much because essentially it's about boredom, being able to go to a place where nothing happens. And stories, in some sense, require stakes and conflict. But I thought you could get stakes there because someone else, House McCurry, for example, might have noticed that this is useful. And so they could be putting a macro architecture up there. Now, we have since looked at macro architectures in Ars Magica. Transforming Mythic Europe has a series of macro architectures for making islands. One of the other books has a floating castle. of a sort. And so House McCurry could be trying to get that sort of thing together, and either because wherever you have humans you have conflict, or because there is some sort of indigenous thing, even if it's only air elementals and Pegasi, that aren't in favour of the humans colonising this space, you've got the potential for conflict. The other possibilities you have are that other civilizations have created macro-architectures there already, and that you're investigating those macro-architectures. For instance, the Atlanteans seem to have been pretty cunning, magical people, and they knew their end was nigh, so you could have a series of levitating bases filled with the artifacts of ancient Hellenic sky fascists. I also remember a horror story, and I'm trying to remember who it's by. It's about a World War One ace. His plane crash lands after he does an ascent, and they find something written on his handkerchief, and basically it says that when he's gone up into the cloud layers, he's found an entirely new ecology there, and initially it was fascinating, but eventually he'd found that there were sky-based predators, and that one of them had spotted his plane and was between his plane and the ground. So he tied a testament onto his handkerchief and a rock, and he threw it over the side. I'm trying to remember who that's by. I'll put it in the notes when that comes together. So, let's try and pull all this into coherence. Imagine a broad, flat, white plain of clouds. From that we can get the following stories. First, if I was to bung a lighthouse up one end, it could, if the viscosity of the clouds was correct and if the wind was of consistent direction, create a series of eddies in a predictable pattern in the lee of the lighthouse. And this could metaphorically be what your covenant does when you first set up the Aegis of the hearth, which explains why fairies hate you. This could also have odd effects on the humans nearby, causing those who are gifted to experience their first spark of magical awareness, causing others that are particularly artistic or creative to notice that their senses are seasonally or locationally enhanced. The clouds may be the pastures on which the Pegasi graze, they may be maintained by air elementals, and they may be opposed by the mountains, who are ancient and powerful earth elementals, a war in which your characters may choose not to participate. If there is an upper sea, which allows for safe travel, House McCurry may want to create a macro architecture up there, sky roads, sky rails, methods of transport, and because this is an obvious idea once you've discovered the upper sea, ancient magical civilizations may have got there first, and already created architectures which are beginning to decay. Oh, if they decay, they might fall. What do you do when a huge piece of road falls out of the sky, particularly if it's still attached at the other end to the sky? The Atlanteans were terrible people. If you read the main accounts of them, they thoroughly deserved to be sunk into the sea by Neptune. They were really vile imperialists. So if any of them are up there, you certainly don't want them coming out. And if they left guard mechanisms, guard spirits, guard creatures behind, you wouldn't want them coming down a road that had fallen at one end to the earth. And then there are all these children going around with magic beans and putting towers up to where these horrible things are. I mean, you can't just blow the whole thing up because it could land on top of mythic Europe. If you found a macro structure, could you somehow tow it all out to the Atlantic, or shrink it, or somehow make it fall as dust, scatter it like light? So I'm sorry that this is an incoherent one compared to usual. The notes that are on the website will be a little more coherent. They won't go up for the next few days. Tomorrow is my birthday as I'm recording. And because this is an unscripted episode, I won't be typing it up on my birthday. out to see Deadpool 2, I think. Anyway, I'll find that Lord Dunsany story and attach it on the end, and eventually put statistics for air elementals and Pegasi and earth elementals and so forth into it. Your saga may vary. For example, it may be more coherent.
The unpasturable fields. Thus spake the mountains, Behold us, even us, the old ones, the grey ones, that wear the feet of time. Time on our rocks shall break his staff and stumble, and still we shall sit majestic, even as now, hearing the sound of the sea, our old coeval sister, who nurses the bones of her children and weeps for the things she has done. Far, far we stand above all things, befriending the little cities until they grow old and leave us to go among the myths. We are the most imperishable mountains. And softly the clouds foregathered from far places, and crag on crag and mountain upon mountain in the likeness of Caucasus upon Himalaya came riding past the sunlight upon the backs of storms, and looked down idly from their golden heights upon the crests of the mountains. Ye pass away, said the mountains, and the clouds answered, as I dreamed or fancied, we pass away, indeed we pass away, but upon our unpasturable fields Pegasus prances. Here Pegasus gallops and browses upon song, which the larks bring to him every morning from far terrestrial fields. His hoofbeats ring upon our slopes at sunrise, as though our fields were of silver, and breathing the dawn wind in dilated nostrils, with head tossed upwards, and with quivering wings he stands and stares from our tremendous heights, and snorts, and sees far future wonderful wars rage in the creases and the folds of the togas that cover the knees of the gods.